Alright, so we've seen a lot of exciting things here now in the past couple days with the campaign flyover and seeing some of the kind of goodies that were revealed in that, and also we kind of got a little teaser at Pirazzo's Lost Legion. So I'd like to kind of jump in here now with Dogs of War, and I want to start off, I want to do a series of these videos. The first one here though, I want to start off with Tilea mainly, because Tilea has been really suspected here as being one of the new factions that's coming out. And there's a lot of suspicion and speculation as to what really Tilea is entailed as far as military-wise goes. And militarily, Tilea has no military. That's the clear and simple answer there for you. The way Tilea actually works is that it fields a ton of mercenaries. And in the Dogs of War, primarily the majority of the units in the book are Tilean mercenaries, or mercenaries that primarily fight for Tilea. And there are a handful of other ones, such as there's some dwarves, there's a high elf, there's some ogres, there's some not Norskins, but in specific just marauders. But we'll go into them in a second video, but for this video I'm going to focus mainly on the human / Tilean element of the Dogs of War. And to really understand the Dogs of War, they were from 5th edition, and that was a time in the Warhammer tabletop battle, or tabletop battle, what the hell, tabletop game, where there was a lot more RPG elements to recruiting a army. Back then you had Mordheim, which was basically a small band of units. Just think of like a 10-man elite unit, kind of like a Fellowship of the Ring, that would level up from game to game, and you could give them more options and more things as they found treasure. It was a time in Warhammer where there were a lot of RPG elements, and with that, you know, you had the ability to recruit mercenaries into your army. They would cost actual gold, quote unquote, and that gold is equivalent to points. And those points would just be added in an extra cost per model and such, and you could take you could take heroes and lords and even special characters from the Dogs of War. Primarily though, you use them for their actual units, and that regiments of renown actually come from the Dogs of War primarily. There were some regiments of renown in a lot of the army books where it talks about certain ones being more exceptional than the others, and that's where we get a little bit of that. But the regiments of renown initially do come from the 5th edition here. And we'll start off here with the way I want to do this is I want to read the little blurb about them. This is not so much the flavor text that we used to get, that we've gotten in previous army books. You know, previous army books, we've gotten that whole, oh, you know, the Phoenix Guard are like this and like that, and here's this and that, and history behind them. These are a little bit more narrative heavy and a little bit more fun. They're supposed to read like a really quick little, like 2-3 paragraph short story about the actual unit. And some of them are written from the aspect of a historical kind of piece, and some of them are written from like a, hey, here's like a day in the life of type thing. So these should be pretty fun for you guys to hear. So I'll read the little blurbs like I usually do. Then I'll go through who the captain of each regiment is, their motto, and their battle cry, which is just kind of a fun little bit, as well as their appearance. The cool thing though about Dogs of War, some can't be hired by certain armies. Like for instance, the first one we're going to jump into is Braganza's Besiegers, and they can't be hired by Skaven. And it gives them a reason. You know, the Skaven regularly raid where they're from, so they're not going to have any part of that. So what we'll do here is just go through that real quick, and I'll go through what I think some of the special rules will be with these units, and talk a little bit about what their special rules are like in the game. There's nothing crazy about these units, because in 5th edition there wasn't a whole ton of special units, special rules per unit. That for the most part was a very homogenous type of, you looked at the theme of the army more so than the actual individual units having these intense like game-breaking special rules like they kind of did in 8th edition, Banner of the World, Dragon, High Elves, if you played. So, you know, that are the Chaos Demons. But whatever, that's neither here nor there, because, you know, Age of Sigmar just shit on everything we own. But we'll start off here with Braganza's Besiegers, and they're one of my more favorite units. If you've played medieval Total War, you'll recognize the way some of these guys look, because all of the Tilean units, Tilea in general looks like Italy, and they borrow very heavily from medieval Italy. Estalia is supposed to be kind of a combination of Italy and Spain, España and Italia, like we talked about. But this is very much more Papal States, medieval Italy, where you've got very varying units and varying approaches to warfare from each city-state, quote-unquote, in Tilea. So here's Braganza's besiegers. The famous regiment of besiegers was originally employed by the ingenious Borgio the Besieger, Prince of Miragliano, as a special siege unit of crossbowmen. Borgio wanted marksmen who would pick off defenders on the walls at close range in the face of a hail of enemy missiles, hold ramparts against assault, provide missile support for sappers and miners, man siege towers, and, if need be, stand their ground against enemy units sallying out of besieged fortresses. Braganza's troops soon proved their worth in Borgio's many sieges, and turned out to be equally good as a rear guard in open battle. Having stormed, starved out, or received the surrender of pretty well every city and fortress that they ever besieged, Borgio was well pleased with Braganza's besiegers, and offered to find them work in return for a cut of the profits. Braganza accepted Borgio's kind offer at once, knowing full well that to refuse Borgio's kindness was not only impolite, but also a terminal course of action. Soon the besiegers took ship for Tabaro, where they took part in the siege of the pirate stronghold on the island of Cerro Scuro. Then they were hired by the dwarves to help recapture a very strong dwarf outpost in the Badlands, which had been recaptured by orcs. Braganza was paid handsomely with a massive chest of jewels, and the regiment began the long trek back to Miragliano through hostile territory to deliver Borgio's agreed share of the loot. No one ever double-crossed Borgio and lived. They battled their way across the Appuccini's in winter and fought off dwarf bandits, orcs, beastmen, empire robber knights, Italian outlaw band, renegade Bretonnian commoners who had treacherously slain their lords, starving and extremely desperate halflings, even more hungry and desperate ogres, the notorious Red Company of Remus, whose captain had a vendetta against Braganza, and various others, winning by forming a hollow square and shooting them all down as they came. On entering Tilea, they heard the news that Borgio had been treacherously assassinated, and his mighty Dogs of War army had either disbanded or split into factions fighting in the streets of Miragliano. Braganza decided to do the obvious thing and share out the jewels and continue his career as one of the best mercenary regiments ever to come out of Tilea. The besiegers were soon hired by the Prince of Lucchini and sent to Sartosa, where the prince was waging war against one or other of the many pirate chiefs on the island. Since then, the besiegers have fought for many masters in many sieges and open battles, always standing like a wall of steel and adding to their legendary reputation. So you got this really kind of nifty-looking unit here. They look very much like the Milanese crossbowmen you'd see in Medieval 2, and that's true to form here. The pavis, as it's called, a pavis, is a very large shield that was worn on the back that would then be slung over and dug into the ground. It had a metal lip on it that would help to kind of jam it into the ground and be used to siege, basically be a siege piece more or less in the front line or from a parapet. Back then, this was like a port. This is a port in the time in the Renaissance where crossbows were mainstays because they were able to completely penetrate through armor. You see a lot of these videos, you'll see a lot of like movies where, oh, this gallant knight riding through the land and just get like plunked by an arrow. It wasn't the case most of the time. You had to have a very special bodkin that would go through the mail and then pierce hopefully through the chainmail. Majority of the time when you had armor, you weren't aiming to swipe their arm clean off with your very sharp broadsword. You were more often than not aiming to incapacitate or knock a unit out of the fight. More often you would quite literally turn their body pieces and body parts into mush with the heavy impact of whatever weapon you were using. Another really here nor there. I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a history lesson on that. And for those of you that are really, really big history buffs, please feel free to correct me. I'm always loving the kind of feedback you guys give me on stuff. But so the captain of the Braganza's besiegers is Luka Braganza. Their motto is invincibility at no extra charge, and their battle cry is Borgio. Their appearance, the besiegers wear full plate armor in the exotic Miragliano style and carry a large pavis on a backstrap. So you, again, have a really amazing kind of unit here. I'm thinking they're going to be your crossbowmen. They're going to have the AP of a crossbow, I would assume, as well as maybe silver shields so they can, take return fire. Maybe that'll be at a cost of maybe it's a toggleable ability that'll prevent them from moving, or maybe even reduce their speed as a whole. But I would see those shields also giving them maybe some charge defense, and they themselves will have heavy armor. So they will be probably pretty stalwart when it comes to being charged by infantry. They'll be able to hold their own a little bit longer than most crossbow units that we see in Total War Warhammer 1. And you can kind of get a feel for how the Dogs of War book is set up just by this first description, right? So it's a little bit more humorous, a little more fun. Like, oh, you know, they fought this and that and this and this and this and that and that and this and this and this and this and this and that and this and that. And you're like, oh, wow. Ooh. It's just kind of, that's the prose of the book. And in fact, a lot of these sentences, I go like 5 or 6, yeah, and sometimes me reading is kind of a little funky, but I go like 5 or 6 lines and then there's a period, and it's just the prose of the book in general is very fun and wacky. But you can see from these units in the pictures here that they're really cool looking units with Braganza's Besiegers here. We'll jump on over, skipping over the dwarves, over into Volans Venators. Volan came to Tilea from somewhere within the Empire. At the same time, he was just one of many mercenary heroes hired by the Tileans in their never-ending wars. He rose to prominence as a leader of a band of mercenary knights called the Venators, which means hunters in Low Tilean. The motives of Volan and his brother knights could not have been more different from the Bretonnian or the Empire traditions of knighthood. They were soldiers of fortune, interested only in 2 things, namely money and spending it. There were also expert cavalry whose thunderous charge could scatter the deepest enemy formations, something which the Tileans desperately needed but lacked until that time. Those who joined Volan were often as not the dispossessed and frequently disgraced sons of the rich and famous, owning nothing but magnificent suits of armor and well-bred war horses. Their ambitions turned mainly to fighting and money, though not necessarily in that order. Not only were they good at fighting, but they were eager to practice and get even better. These young wastrels were joined by renegade knights from the Empire and 1 or 2 Bretonnian knights errant who somehow forgot their noble errands, leading to a lot of good-humored rivalry and brawling. Volan decreed that the Venators should abandon all identifying family crests and adopt new names in order to obscure their true origins. It is rumored that Volan himself was really the disgraced son of some well-known Empire count. There were also rumors that he was none other than the bastard son of the Emperor. Volan himself never sought to affirm or contradict any of these tales, which consequently grew ever more elaborate and unlikely over the years. The story that he was the shameful offspring of the Fey Enchantress of Bretonnia and an extraordinarily intelligent, one-eyed pig called Eric is one of the less credible yarns spun about Volan's mysterious past. Volan's Venators fought their way through the old world, hiring themselves out for gold, which they spent mainly on debauched drinking sessions in which wine was consumed by the gallon. For a while, they traveled east, where they were hired by some of the more desperate of the border princes, tenaciously holding on to their tiny realms in the orc-infested wastes. For the entertainment between battles, the Venators joust against each other, while their companions make wagers on the outcome. It is quite common for Venators to be seriously injured or even killed in these fights, or in the drunken brawls which inevitably follow. The regiment is accompanied on the march by a long baggage train of servants, grooms, and raucous camp followers, piled on top of trundling wagons loaded with casks of looted wine. The noise of their camp can be heard miles away. Volan and his men once shocked Bretonnian chivalry by the sheer audacity of turning up at the great tourney of Corun, with their armor still tarnished with the mud and blood of Kislevites battlefields. Despite nursing gargantuan hangovers and against all expectations, the Venators unhorsed the king's champion and a score of the best knights in the realm. The king of Bretonnia was so incensed that he swore Volan would never enter his realm again except in chains. Despised by Bretonnian knights and shunned by knights of the Empire, the Venators care not a fig. They have fought in many hard battles against the worst of enemies in places where nobler and more sober knights have never even seen. So the captain is obviously Volan. His motto is Volan's Venators, the answer, no questions asked. The battle cry, last one to die, is a sissy. and their appearance is the regiment wears burnished brass armor, no heraldry except a V sign. So, giant knights for the V for Vendetta, basically. And again, you get an idea. It's a really fun kind of like unit. Like, oh yeah, it's just a bunch of drunken, surly knights who are basically like rock stars in the Warhammer world, just spelunking from town to town with their groupies, blowing through hood rats left and right. Basically the way I kind of see these guys. And they're really going to be a heavily armored cavalry unit here. Nothing too crazy with these guys, I don't think. I'm just seeing probably a heavy cav unit, and if it depends on how they're going to make Dogs of War. Are they going to make them available to the units that can use them? Like, for instance, any Warhammer army can hire the Venators except Bretonnia. Volan was banned from the realm upon pain of death following the debacle of the Tournament of Corone. So I'm wondering if that's going to happen. Okay, Dogs of War are going to enter the game. They're going to be maybe hireable a la Regiments of Renown, and in the same way, only certain armies can hire them. So maybe Bretonnia can't hire these guys at all. So picture now Dwarfs with the ability to hire the Volans Venators. So they've got an ability to field cavalry, finally. So they can counter heavy cavalry like the Blood Knights, stuff like that. So I'm wondering how they're going to do them, if they even put them in the game. This is mainly just kind of speculation and hopes that we do see all of them. I mean, we've already seen one of them in the flyover, so it's going to be interesting to see how they do this. Is this just going to be a rogue army that maybe you can unlock for multiplayer? We'll see. But we'll jump on over now to, I think, one of the ones that a lot of people are looking to hear about, and that is Pirazzo's Lost Legion. Me being Italian, it's kind of easy for me to understand that the double Z is usually like a Z sound, like a Pirazzo, versus like a Pirazzo. And like the double C sound is usually a CH sound. My last name has a double C in it, so I know all too well. But we'll start off again here we'll jump into Pirazzo's Lost Legion. And this is the one we saw in the flyover campaign, right before we jumped into the Mazda Mundi portion, if you want to go take a look. We just saw the banner of them. Pirazzo's Lost Legion are all that remains of the expedition sent to Lustria by the merchants of Tabaro. The regiment was one of the 3 recruited in Tabaro from among the reckless and poverty-stricken youths of the city. The promise of untold wealth to be found in the jungles of Lustria was a temptation none could resist, and they joined the colors in droves. Fernando Pirazzo was hired to command one of the regiments. Although young, he was already an experienced mercenary captain, skilled in the art of war. Before the expedition embarked, he trained his men in the use of both pike and crossbow, the 2 traditional weapons of Tilea mercenaries, foreseeing the conditions that the regiment would encounter in the jungles of Lustria. No sooner had the expedition arrived in Lustrian waters than it had ran into trouble. When all the mercenaries had disembarked, the sailors of the ships, who were also mercenaries, weighed anchor and abandoned them, taking the pay chests of the 3 regiments with them. Of course, as a precaution against an opposed landing, the pay chests had been left to last. Pirazzo had advised against this, but had been outvoted by the other 2 captains. Now the mercenaries realized that he was by far the best leader, and the other 2 regiments mutinied. Their incompetent and unfortunate captains were cast adrift on rafts in the mangrove swamps, and the mercenaries joined together in a single regiment under Pirazzo's command, calling themselves the Lost Legion. Everybody knew that obeying Pirazzo's orders was their best hope of survival, and so no one objected when he insisted that the troops remain encamped on the coast until everyone was trained to use both pike and crossbow. After several weeks, all the bad elements among the stranded mercenaries were either dead, executed, or had split off into the jungle to their inevitable doom in small groups. The rest were all trained in Pirazzo's exacting standards, and all men he could rely on to obey his orders. Now he was ready to lead them into the interior to adventure, riches, or death. After a grueling march, the Lost Legion came upon some lizardmen ruins. Cautiously they entered the ruined city, and soon found gold and gems in various vaults and chambers. As the mercenaries were marching out again, laden with treasures, the lizardmen launched a series of ambushes on the causeway and amid the spawning ponds of the ruined city. Thanks to Pirazzo's foresight in training his men to use crossbows and pikes, none of the enemy could get the regiment in enough numbers to force them off the causeway. Their first ambush met with a hail of crossbow bolts, while the second ran into massed pikes. In the afternoon, the skinks met with crossbow volleys against, and later, the Saurus were repulsed by the pikes. The losses among skinks and Saurus were terrible, and soon the ponds were choked with scaly corpses. Just when heat, thirst, and fatigue were almost beyond endurance, the mage priest called off the attacks. The enemy seemed to have to answer to both the skirmishers and his shock troops, and so he had to think of a more cunning tactics. In the pause, Pirazzo found himself considering the possibility of striking a deal with the mage priest to serve him as a mercenary and ultimately to return home rich. It was strangely as if the idea had been put in his mind from somewhere else. Quickly, he ordered his men to put down their loot and retreat along the causeway. He was obeyed without question, though it broke the men's hearts to abandon the gold. The regiment marched back into the ruins and made camp in the plaza to await events, although Pirazzo did not know what to expect. When the sun rose, the sentries were amazed to see not only the piles of treasure returned to the mercenaries, less the biggest and best tablets of gold, but also heaps of food and great gourds of refreshing water. The plaza was lined with Saurus warriors, permitting only one way out of the ruins, to the south. The Lost Legion took the loot, the supplies, and the road appointed for them. The Legion marched for many weeks to the south. They did not encounter any more cities, but did find further piles of supplies along the route. Eventually, they entered an eerie landscape of fetid swamps. Here they were attacked by zombie hordes of the Vampire Coast. Now, it was clear that the priests had sent Pirazzo against their most dreaded enemies. The Lost Legion fought valiantly and defeated the undead wherever they met them. At last, they reached the sea. Here, the mercenaries filled their knapsacks with treasure from shipwrecks which they found scattered along the coast. Then, taking the best timbers, they repaired the most seaworthy of the decaying hulks and put to sea. Just when the hulk was on the verge of sinking, Pirazzo sighted land. It was the coast of Araby. Not long after the Lost Legion marched inland, they were hired by one of the emirs of the Corsairs, who was afraid of what Pirazzo and his men might do if he didn't hire them. Since then, Pirazzo's Lost Legion has fought its way across Araby, Saratosa, and into Tilea once more, serving many masters, winning great wealth, and recruiting the reckless and adventurous to the regimental banner. The captain is obviously Pirazzo. The motto is "Trained in Lustria," and the battle cry is "Death or Riches." And the regiment wears polished brass armor, green uniforms, and green crests. They wear their hair long. So, really cool history behind these guys. It's really kind of cool too to see like the interaction between humans and lizardmen. There's not a lot of it in a lot of the books, and Burning Shore is one of them, where they talk a lot about how they don't really understand the lizardmen, but they're kind of trying to communicate with them at the same time. It's a really cool book. If you haven't read it, read it. But so you see, like, basically the lizardmen put the idea in Pirazzo's head to stop attacking, and you have, imagine that, waking up to, oh, here's all of our gold, here's all of our supplies, we're completely surrounded by Saurus that aren't moving, we'll just follow and leave this way. So it kind of just like herded them into exactly where they wanted them, which is kind of a nifty thing, because the lizardmen basically hired them without actually doing it like through words, which is pretty damn cool. So in the game, you can choose to have Pirazzo's Lost Legion all armed with swords, crossbows, and light armor, or with sword, pike, and heavy armor. So I'm not sure how they're going to do this in Total War. I'm not sure if they're going to have him be like a leader of a mercenary army. The mercenary army is going to be maybe some sort of generic human army. I'm not sure. Excuse me, not sure. With this army being in it, maybe they'll have kind of the same aspect that the Lothern Sea Guard are going to have, where the Lothern Sea Guard can choose to shoot with their bow and arrow, then pick up their swords and their spears and shields to attack. A lot of units from here on out are going to be very similar to Pirazzo's Lost Legion, and I apologize about that, because we're pretty much going to have 4 of these units that are going to be just like this. They're going to be heavy armor or light armored pike units. So I do apologize about that ahead of time. It is kind of an annoying thing with the Dogs of War, but they each have a really cool character and history behind them. So half the time you're choosing one of these units is because you like the story more so than the actual unit special rules, because they're not game-breaking special rules. The pike in Total War, or I'm sorry, in the Warhammer tabletop, and how this might translate into Total War Warhammer, is that it's probably going to be an AP anti-large charge defense type weapon. I would expect maybe, I don't know if they'll include a phalanx, but they have a phalanx. The Pirazzo's Lost Legion has a phalanx in the tabletop, so it'd be interesting to see if they did bring that into Total War. This would be the first time we've seen it, but we've seen it obviously in other Total Wars, just not this one. So the pike is supposed to confer a bonus to the wielder and a negative to the horses of the cavalry. So I would love to see if they did that, but I definitely could see that just being as charge defense, the standard kind of charge defense we see with a lot of units in Total War Warhammer. But we'll move on here to another similar unit in Leopold's Leopard Company. And I didn't talk about Pirazzo's Lost Legion as far as how they looked, but you'll see from the pictures above, obviously, you'll get a really good sense of how these units actually look. You've got that phalanx, you've got the big banner that we've seen from the flyover, so hopefully you guys get a good idea from these pictures, because I don't talk about them as much in this video because there's not a whole ton, but the guys we're supposed to get into, or about to get into right now, Leopold's Leopard Company, they do have a pretty cool look to them, so let's just jump right in. The Leopard Company takes its name from the legendary leopard of Lucini, which is a badge and mascot of the city. It is said that this leopard was the guardian of the divine twins Lucan and Lucini, founders of the city. According to the story, the twins became lost in the wilderness when they were still only children and took refuge in a cave of the Great Rock, later to be the Acropolis of the city. The cave was the lair of a leopard, but this was no ordinary leopard. She had 2 heads and 3 tails. She could also speak prophecies from one of her heads and warnings from the other. The leopard protected the twins just as if they were her own cubs until shepherds found them. They also found the bones of many orcs, wolves, bears, and trolls around the cave, which the leopard had slain protecting the twins. According to the myth, the leopard prophesied that Lucan and Lucina would found a great city on the rock and rule it as a king and queen. Then the other head warned that the descendants of the twins would fight each other for their realm. After having thus spoken, the leopard disappeared into the cave and was never seen again. The temple of Lucan and Lucina was built over the cave, in which credulous people still believe the leopard lives. The guards of the temple, hired by the priests and paid for by the pious donations from the merchants of the city, were called the Leopard Company, because their sworn duty was to guard the Acropolis as ferociously as the mythical leopard. Thus, the regiment adopted the leopard as its badge. Unfortunately, there was always fighting in the principality between the 2 lines claiming descent from Lucan or Lucina. This only ended recently when Lorenzo Lupo claimed descent from both, and anyone who disagreed either came to a bad end or has since fled the city. Unfortunately for them, the priests of the city of Lucan and Lucina supported the claim of Lorenzo's rival Leopold, who claimed to be a direct descendant of Lucan. Under Leopold's command, the Leopard Company held the Acropolis for many days against Lorenzo's troops. The state of the civil unrest persisted until the priests consulted the Oracle of Lucina, which came down in favor of Lorenzo, albeit a very cryptic augury. The priests promptly cast the Leopard Company from their employment in an effort to placate the vengeful Lorenzo. The soldiers had grown used to extremely good pay and gold, and always dressed immaculately and enjoyed the best that the city could provide in food, wine, and entertainment. They were extremely angry. Consequently, the Leopard Company, forgetting their sacred duty, broke down the golden doors of the temples, took the pay owed to them, and laid hands on the priests who were thrown off the Acropolis into the sea. Then they defiantly held out against Lorenzo for a further 2 weeks of bloody siege. Finally, Lorenzo decided to offer Leopold a deal he could not refuse. He would allow Leopold and the Leopard Company to march out of the city in return for ending the siege and promising never to make war on him. Leopold reluctantly set aside his claim, under pressure from his men who wanted to get away with the gold from the temple rather than die. Also, they were afraid that they had offended the 2 gods of the city and were anxious to leave the Acropolis before divine vengeance struck them, possibly in the form of a rampant 2-headed leopard. And so the regiment marched out of Tilea and took service with the various other princes. After much hard campaigning, the regiment had been mauled in many unlikely battles. The superstitious soldiers regarded this as a vengeance of the leopard, which they had sworn to protect and whose temple they had pillaged. Leopold, anxious to hold his regiment together, called a meeting on the stricken battlefield of Terra Morta, and told his men that they must regain the favor of the gods. So they voted to appease the leopard by sending back a portion of everything they captured as loot to the temple of Lucini. The next battle ended in overwhelming victory against all the odds, with the Leopard Company taking the lions, or rather the leopards, share of the loot. For Leopoldo, this earned him the nickname De Luci, meaning the fortunate. Since then, the regiment has gone from strength to strength, fighting in many far distant lands, but always remembering to send something back for the coppers of the priests of the Temple of Lucini. The captain is Leopoldo de Lucini. The motto is "Proceeds to the Lucini Temple's Restoration Fund." The battle cry is "For the Leopard." And the appearance is pretty cool here. Burnished brass, very ornate, muscled cuirass with a leopard's face embossed on the breastplate. Leather tassets attached to the cuirass. White uniforms and white crests. They wear gilded or real wreaths of laurel leaves around their helmets. The banner bearer and the drummer wear wear leopard pelts draped over their shoulders. Their banner shows a leopard with 2 heads and 3 tails. So almost like the origin story of Rome with Romulus and Remus and the she-wolf that raised them. But again, you have another pike unit here. So again, we're probably going to see an AP, anti-large, charge defense type phalanx unit here. They do have only the option to be heavy armor and long pikes. There's no crossbow involved in these guys. But you kind of got an idea from the flavor text here that these are really cool kind of units. They have these leopard heads on their armor, on their helmets. I mean, almost very reminiscent to the Teutonic Knights from the Germanic knightly orders, but of course just being leopards. And they even have, like, their sergeants kind of have that same look of the it's not the Triarii, but the people who carry the standards in every single cohort of Roman legionnaires. So you kind of have that same style on those guys as well, with the leopard head. But although they didn't wear a leopard, of course, in the Roman legion, but still, my point remains. That kind of awesome look, with that really gilded, very ornate look to their armor and everything. So I'm very curious to see if they add these in. So again, keep in mind that this is going to be a great way for a unit like the Vampire Counts to have a heavily armored anti-cav unit that's going to allow them to really hold a flank, hold a line, protect them against maybe a stronger Bretonnian presence, all of the Grail Guardians and the such, that typically do quite the number against the undead, against the Vampire Counts. Also, it does kind of give you a strong unit for, again, dwarfs that allows you to fight against cav on a more equal footing than most of the units in the dwarf army. So we'll jump across here to that kind of puts the pikemen to rest for a little bit here, guys. So don't worry, we'll get to 2 more later, but for now we've kind of stopped them. But let's just jump on now over to Bronzino's battery of galloper guns. So Bronzino's gallopers were first employed at the Battle of Patio. These were in fact lightweight cannons removed from their mountings on the galleys of Remus and fixed to specially made carriages. This was done on the instructions of the master gunner Bronzino, who had been hired by Borgio the Besieger, Prince of Miragliano. This innovation contributed in no small measure to the victory, and Bronzino proceeded to raise a battery of specially designed guns forged in the very same foundry as that used by Leonardo da Miragliano to cast his colossal brass statues. Bronzino served Borgio well in many more battles, but following the prince's assassination and the uncertain state of affairs in Miragliano, Bronzino sought other employment. Since then, the battery has turned up in the armies of several notorious mercenary generals, bringing them victory and earning Bronzino enough gold to enable him to forge more and improve designs of lightweight cannons. The gunners bring the cannons into action rapidly and fire at close range. This can have a devastating effect on the enemy in an open battle. As soon as the enemy move near enough to threaten the gunners hitch them up and gallop off at speed, finding a new position further back. If the battle goes badly and it is necessary to retreat, the precious cannons can be removed from the battlefield without delay. This not only saves the guns for use again, but it makes it unlikely that the enemy will capture them, nor do the guns have to be abandoned in a hasty retreat like other more cumbersome artillery. Having earned an awesome reputation in Tilea, and incurred with the undying hatred of the survivors of many a pike company, Bronzino's battery was shipped across the ocean to take action against the Lizardmen in a doomed treasure hunting expedition led by the dwarf pirate Cougar Halfbeard. Bronzino used the speed of the guns to fight a heroic rearguard action through the jungle to the beach, felling pursuing Saurus warriors in droves as they went. Indeed, the guns were still firing from the longboats as they were pushed out to sea, sweeping the beach clear of the enemy until they were safely in open water. The battery subsequently turned up in Araby and took part in Sultan's war against the undead, where the speed and mobility of the guns proved decisive in the open expanses of parched sand. Greatly enriched by his efforts, Bronzino brought his battery back to Tilea, where he has been reforging and refitting the guns and considering the numerous and very generous offers arriving every day from rival merchant princes plotting to make war on each other. The captain obviously being Bronzino, the motto, "the biggest bang for your bucks," the battle cry, "ready, aim, fire," and the appearance is a small, lightweight bronze or brass cannons harnessed to light limbers drawn by one horse. One of the gunner's riders rides the horse, the others run beside the gun, carrying the ramrods and other equipment. Bronzino is a big man riding his own horse and wearing ornate armor. So we have a really, really cool unit here. So you've got what is in a lot of the, which is in really Empire Total War, you've got that kind of horse-drawn artillery that can move around and set up different positions of fire pretty quickly. So with this, we would have a way to kind of have almost like a skirmishing artillery piece, which would be a first for Total War, I would think. Or I'm sorry, for Total War Warhammer. I always just want to say Total War to make it short. TWWH, if you want to call it that. So I definitely see we're gonna probably have something where it's just a simple cannon. So it's going to have your anti-large characteristic, and it's going to have your AP characteristic as well, but it's going to be drawn by horses. This makes me think, because they talk about it being a light cannon, this makes me think that it's probably going to have a shorter range, and it can actually move around a lot quicker. So as a result, the shorter range is going to come, as a mobility, the shorter range is going to be your sacrifice. So that's the way I could really see them placed in Total War Warhammer, but also I could see them with a Vanguard deployment. They kind of hint at it a little bit here in the rules, but it wouldn't surprise me if there was the ability for it to just get up in the front quickly, because they have the ability to deploy either as a deployed siege piece or artillery piece, or as the horse-drawn artillery piece. So I'd be really interested to see how they kind of push that out in Total War Warhammer. But we can also now jump over here to the Marksmen of Miragliano. And the cross, well, I'll just kind of jump into this, but first I want to talk about a little bit about, I almost got ahead of myself, about Bronzino's galloping galloper guns. The unit themselves, you kind of see this repeating motif of bronze and brass and green, which is a lot of the heraldry and everything of Tilea, and a lot of the kind of Renaissance / or late medieval period Italy type feel that we get, the city-state look of everything. So you're hopefully seeing that here a little bit more. We're going to see that more with the Marksmen of Miragliano here, as they kind of have a bit of that look and that pizzazz as it goes. But let's jump on into them. The crossbow has always been the favored missile weapon in Tilea, no doubt because its long range enabled the troops to shoot from high on the ramparts, across the broad moats and ditches into the enemy hordes. Crossbow bolts have the striking power to pierce armor and inflict mortal wounds on tough and determined opponents. The crossbow is also handy for use in confined spaces such as the ramparts, towers, gateways, and narrow streets of Tilean cities, and on board Tilean galleys. It is therefore no surprise that the Tileans never really bothered with ordinary bows. One of the most famous regiments to use the crossbow is known simply but aptly as the Marksmen. The Marksmen have been going for 100 years or more, under several different captains. As one captain fell in battle or retired, the most senior surviving Marksman would assume leadership, and the regiment would continue. The regiment always recruits its soldiers from Miragliano, and returns to its home city every now and again to replenish its ranks and renew family ties. Any recruit must prove his marksmanship by shooting a bolt through the head of the prince on a gold ducat. The coin is, of course, placed in the center of a target set at range of 300 paces. Once accepted, recruits hone their marksmanship to perfection with constant practice. Such is their success that Miragliano has fewer pigeons than any other city in Tilea, and not that many cats or dogs either. The list of battles in which the marksmen have won distinction and, needless to say, rich rewards in the Empire alone are too numerous to list. As well as fighting for the Emperor, the regiment has served the Tsarina of Kislev and several dwarf lords. On other occasions, the marksmen have fought on the same side as High Elves and have taken part in many overseas adventures. The captain is Maximilian Demarque. The motto is, "We hit the right spot every time," and the battle cry is, "Shoot." The appearance, the marksmen are typical. The marksmen are typical of veteran mercenary companies and wear a variety of clothing, armor, and equipment gleaned from the four corners of the Warhammer world. Many of the marksmen wear a badge in their caps or hats consisting of a tall feather and a pierced gold ducat. The feather represents the swift, light flight of a crossbow bolt, and it looks very fine too. The pierced ducat is the very coin that the trooper must strike from 300 paces as a test of marksmanship before he's allowed to join the marksmen. So this unit here, again, we have now a light armored marksman, crossbow unit. We have the heavy crossbow unit with Braganza's Besiegers. So they have the special rule of skirmish. So the way I really kind of see these guys playing out is a skirmish unit with AP and having kind of that radius, that the full circle firing that the Way Watchers do, because these guys are a little bit more elite, very accurate. So they're going to have probably a very high ranged attack, and maybe even a quicker range speed. I'm not really sure 100% on how they're going to do it, but with that light armor, they're going to be pretty vulnerable, but with the skirmish ability, they'll be pretty nimble as well. So I could see them definitely maybe even having a vanguard deployment as well with Bronzino's battery, so maybe they can work in conjunction to really kind of get to the fore of the enemy. But as I was talking about here, with these guys, you see a very kind of Renaissance look, almost kind of like musketeers in a way, and I do love me some musketeers. But very simple unit, nothing too crazy or out of the box with them. But I do think that we're going to see something that allows for maybe a unit like Vampire Counts or a unit like, or the army like Chaos, a chance to have a very strong ranged presence that can threaten some of the more ranged, I'm sorry, not ranged, but flying units that we're going to probably see in Total War Warhammer 2. But we'll jump over here now to Vespero's Vendetta. And these units are really awesome. I think they look really cool too. They kind of have like a sinister Punisher look, so I really dig on these guys hard. So the rivalry between the merchants of Tilea is so violent that everyone of consequence hires bodyguards. These bodyguards protect their masters from plotters, assassins, rebels, and the like. Inevitably, bodyguards end up fighting in the streets with the rival bodyguards. Street battles frequently break out in the narrow alleys and piazzas of Chilean cities in times of war, revolt, or civil disturbances, or in other words, pretty much every damn day. Damn is not in there, but ad-libbed. It is said that Stabio, S-T-A-B-B-I-O, so I don't think it's Stabio, Stabio the Bad, exiled prince of Lucchini, was the first to train his bodyguards as expert duelists, armed in what has since become the traditional duelist style. Others started to copy this innovative style of fighting after suffering at the hands of Stabio's henchmen. A prince finding himself in exile or a fugitive from his city is wise to hire a band of freelance duelists and use their services to regain or usurp power. Indeed, not only princes, but also adventurers, ambassadors, and explorers often hire an escort of duelists who will appear to the uninitiated to be ordinary traveling companions until they're required to cast aside their cloaks to protect their master. Various mercenary generals have even hired duelists for use in battle to protect the vulnerable flanks and rear of the mercenary pike companies. The most notorious band for hire in Tilea and the lands beyond that is that of Vespero, a young and reckless nobleman much given to self-indulgence and dubious escapades. Vespero is known as the Wasp, summed up by a stubborn persistence ending in a very nasty sting. Vespero was the younger son of a powerful merchant in Lucchini, but due to a quarrel with a rival family over the favors of a noble lady, he was forced into exile in Pirazzo, where he joined a mercenary bodyguard. Unfortunately, Vespero's romantic adventures got him into trouble here as well, and his expert skill resulted in the untimely end of so many noble youths in the city that their families all swore vendettas against him and put a bounty of 1 million gold ducats on his head. Hunted through the streets by rival duelists, he barely escaped from the city with his life. From that moment, Vespero, together with his band of reckless young duelists, handpicked by him as the best exponents of their art, were up for hire to the highest bidder. They soon earned a notorious reputation not only in street fights but in various battles, coups, and revolts throughout Tilea and beyond. Recently, Vespero turned up in Maragliano, where Borgio gave him the opportunity to get even with his pursuers as part of the great prince's political intrigues. After the last and most successful assassination of Borgio and the street fighting in Maragliano which followed, Vespero disappeared, although he has no way implicated since he had been paid well and so was presumably as loyal as could be expected. His motive is more likely to be to seek out those behind Borgio's demise, to get posthumous revenge as a final act of loyalty to his former protector. Who knows where Vespero will turn up next. The captain, obviously Vespero, the motto, vengeance with a smile, and the battle cry, prepare to die. The appearance, the duelists of Vespero's vendetta wear tight-fitting black clothing and carry a cloak. They are youthful and agile, wear their hair long and dress in the latest Tilean styles. They are armed with an elegant dueling sword and a left-handed dagger. This dagger is used to parry opponent's sword thrusts, and its hilt is therefore shaped so as to catch an adversary's blade. These weapons are kept concealed beneath the cloak so that the duelists can accompany their master, carry messages for him, or walk the streets of the city without attracting unnecessary attention or revealing that they are armed. In combat, the cloak itself is used to skillfully parry and catch opponents' weapon strikes. Vespero, like many of his men, has several impressive dueling scars. So, these guys have quite a few rules here. They are armed with 2 weapons, as you can see. You know, they've got their left-handed dagger, they've got their dueling sword, but they also have light armor as well. But they do have skirmish, they have their grimacing death masks. So the way I really see this unit is almost kind of like a souped up, maybe not souped up, but kind of like a slayer, like a dwarf slayer. So I see an AP on them, maybe a stock mechanic to kind of play into the whole fact that they're kind of stealthy looking and everything like that. But definitely an anti-infantry mechanic, a fear mechanic with their grimacing death masks. In the tabletop, it makes it so they fumble their first attack, so I don't really see that being translating into the Total War Warhammer. But maybe their cloak and dagger has something that it infers, maybe a bronze shield on them or some sort of defense bonus. Obviously, they're not using the cloak to swing in the air and knock around arrows like in Jet Li's Hero, but I do see that that cloak and dagger portion is going to come into play, maybe as some sort of not toggleable, but like an activated buff that increases their melee defense or at the cost of their melee attack. So maybe they can hold out a little bit longer, since I do see them as light armored. But picture them on a flank with that stock mechanic where, you know, they can kind of at least help protect against something that wraps around, or maybe they're used as a hero or a character sniper to get them out of play early. So I definitely see kind of like a heavy assassin unit here in Vespero's Vendetta, and they're very cool looking too. Like I was saying, Vespero himself kind of looks like the Warhammer's Punisher, so pretty rad. But we'll jump on over to the last 3 units here, and we're going to jump into a little bit more of the pike units again. Worry not, these 2 are still pretty cool and flavorful in their own right. But we'll start with the Al-Qatani Fellowship. It is with some desperation that Rodrigo Del Monte surveyed the ruins of his crop. Yesterday he had stood upon the same spot and admired the unfolding acres of Al-Qatani, ripening in the hot Tilian sun. Today, where once had grown apples and citrus, vines and olive trees, there was nothing but charred stumps smoldering upon a ravaged landscape. The passage of El Cadavo's rampaging army had left him an impoverished and broken man. The agricultural efforts of a long and hard life had proven utterly and cruelly fruitless. The life of a farmer, even a wealthy landowner, was never an easy one in the war-torn land of Tilea. When Rodrigo Del Monte found himself destitute, he embarked upon the only course of action that remained to him. He became a soldier. His workforce, faced with the unappealing option of starvation, signed up without question. In Remus, Rodrigo sold his last and favorite mule, and with the proceeds bought some shoddy armor, a few second-hand helmets, and a batch of slightly bent pikes. With a bit of elbow grease, a few hammer blows, and the aid of a steaming kettle, Rodrigo's men set about preparing themselves for their first battle. By the time they had finished, they didn't look bad. The Al-Qatani Fellowship's first job was not particularly glamorous or lucrative, escorting a consignment of dung to a rhubarb grower outside of Remus, but soon Rodrigo began to gain a reputation for reliability. The rich and successful were prepared to pay top prices for the best troops, but for every rich merchant, there was 10 small-scale operators who couldn't afford the services of the more expensive mercenaries. The Al-Qatani Fellowship found a niche. Despite its rather modest origin, the Al-Qatani Fellowship has proven itself on more than one occasion. Their first battle more or less set the trend. The villagers of Bucholia, a small wine-growing community in the lee of the Appuccini Mountains, found themselves terrorized by a particularly nasty gang of orcs. These greenskins had come to Tilea as mercenaries, but had proven to be unreliable and untrustworthy that no one would employ them. So they became bandits instead, raiding small farms and villages and generally making life miserable for poor, hardworking village folk. In Bucholia, the villagers pooled all their savings to hire mercenaries to help them, but sadly no one was willing to work for 7 ducats, 3 farthings, and a goat. Even the moneylenders refused to deal with them. When Rodrigo Del Monte heard of their plight, he was angered and indignant. The villager's story was a familiar tale of honest, hardworking folk, rare enough in Tilea, unable to find justice because they were poor and powerless. Rodrigo knew this tale very well indeed. Although he had not exactly grown rich as a mercenary, what he had was enough, and so he decided to help the desperate villagers. The Al-Qatani Fellowship arrived in the dead of a night, after a long march in the pouring rain. From the roadside they could see the smoldering torches of the orc raiders as they climbed down the slopes behind the village. Tired and hungry as they were, the valiant pikemen prepared for battle. It was quite a surprise for the orcs. They had expected helpless groveling peasants. Instead, they found themselves confronted by grim-faced men with steel-tipped pikes, who fought with the determination of the possessed. After a short struggle, the orc raiders lay dead and scattered. Rodrigo had triumphed. In return, he asked for no money, but only the thanks of the villagers. The villagers were more than willing to give. Since that day, the Al-Qatani Fellowship have fought many battles for many masters, including many of the richest and most famous mercenary generals of Tilea. But even today, they are willing to fight for the poor and helpless at rates which they are far below those of most mercenaries. Although he may never be rich himself, amongst the common people of the countryside, Rodrigo del Monte is the most popular mercenary captain in the land. He is cheered and greeted wherever he goes, and stories of his unselfish deeds are told around the hearth of simple country folk throughout all Tilea. So the captain here is Rodrigo del Monte, as we found. The motto is "Cut price, cutthroats you can afford." I'm sorry, the cut price, cutthroats you can afford. Battle cry is "Yes!" And their appearance is the Al-Qatani Fellowship wear simple, some might say cheap, armor and red-crested helmets of unfashionable design. Their clothing is simple, practical, and somewhat threadbare. They carry sturdy steel-tipped pikes. So I see these guys as kind of being like the entry level of the Dogs of War unit. They all have light armor. They just have their simple pikes here, so nothing really special. So again, I think we're going to see an AP, anti-large, charge defense type phalanx unit here, but with the benefit of maybe being very cheap to afford, and the very first one you can afford for that matter. And on top of it, I could easily see that they have some sort of leadership mechanic, either a negative one, maybe because they're not the most stalwart and price heavy ones, or maybe a rather good one, or one maybe they not I don't want to say have a frenzy, but maybe they're unbreakable because they are fighting for such a good cause in one way or another. Like maybe they see that. So this is, again, I think your very entry level unit into the Dogs of War, and they are a light armored pike, and we've seen now some heavy armored pike with Pirazzo's Lost Legion and Leopold's Leopard Company, but we're going to see now another one as well as we jump on over here to Rico's Republican Guard. And I promise this is the last pike unit that we're going to be dealing with the Dogs of War, and also coincidentally the second to last unit in this video at least. So Rico's Republican Guard. The Republican Guard was raised in Remus by a group of rebellious merchants during the time of a disastrous famine and widespread revolts that preceded the birth of the Republic. The regiment played a leading part in overthrowing the tyrannical merchant prince of Remus, the notorious Omilio Mondo. It was upon one of the guard's pikes that Mondo's head was paraded around the city to the drunken applause of the mob. The revolt involved a great deal of vicious street fighting in which no mercy was shown by either faction, and none asked for either. Several captains of the Republican Guard fell in quick succession, often shot in the back by Mondo's henchmen who had concealed themselves on the rooftops or high up in the bell towers surrounding the palace. In the thick of battle, a common soldier by the name of Rico, known as Ragged Rico, because of his torn and bloodied clothing, assumed command. He seemed blessed by the war goddess herself, and survived even the bloodiest hand-to-hand combat, despite fighting at the forefront of battle. With the Republic firmly established, the regiment was showered with praise and honors, if not much actual cash. Their bandaged wounds and numerous scars gave the young guardsmen plenty of opportunity to talk about their courage in battle. The ladies of Remus proved very sympathetic to the poor wounded soldiers, listening attentively to their tales of bravery and daring do as they tended their wounds. The guardsmen felt justifiably proud of their torn and blood-stained uniforms and the bandages that proved that fine fighters they were. Another good reason for their rough appearance was that the impoverished New Republic could not afford much of their loyalty, and pay was usually well in arrears. Desperate to bring in some hard cash, Ragged Rico led the Republican Guard in search of employment in other Tilean cities. The Guard fought well and always made sure that they were promptly paid by threatening to mutiny. Since they were far better fighters than any other regiment in any army which they happened to be serving, the cash was forthcoming in large amounts, and a handsome share of any booty on top. The reputation of the regiment grew steadily and attracted new recruits from all over Tilea, usually strong young peasant lads fed up with tilling fields for rich landowners. Ragged Rico tramped the lengths and breadth of Tilea and helped the citizens of many embattled cities to assert their rights against tyrants and oppressors. When news of the regiment's success reached the ears of the Republican Council, they immediately sent for Rico. They felt that, as a citizen of Remus, leading a regiment raised by a Republican merchant, he owed them a share of the wagon loads of gold and spoils of war won by his pikemen. Back in Remus, Rico and the Republican Council soon fell out over the share out and... Man, that was a really weird sentence here. Back in Remus, Rico and the Republican Council soon fell out over the share out, and Rico ordered several wagons of loot to be taken out of the city under the cover of darkness. When the council found out, they voted Rico's execution by a majority of 1. Rico's loyal soldiers, who had fought side by side with him in many heroic battles, were in no mood to stand by while their beloved captain was chopped into tiny bits and impaled on the leaning tower of Remus. The regiment promptly rescued Rico from his dungeon in the tower, routing all troops sent against him, which outnumbered them 10 to 1 in the process. With Rico at their head, the regiment marched out of Remus with their loot. The citizens cheered them from the rooftops, and a few tears were shed by the ladies of Remus, who threw silken scarves and handkerchiefs, which the troops tied about their arms and helmets as a memento of the hospitality they had enjoyed. They marched from Tilea to Sartosa, and traveled over the sea to Astalia, Bretonia, the Empire, Kislev, and the beleaguered border princes, where the regiment was continued to win fame and renown ever since. Captain obviously being Ragged Rico. The motto, Rico's reputation Republican, the price of freedom. The battle cry is liberty, equity, liquidity. And their appearance is Rico's Republican Guard wear ornate, polished armor and red crested helms. They have blood-stained bandages tied around their arms, legs, or heads, badges of courage which they are justifiably proud. Such is their popularity that they also wear numerous silken scarves donated by adorning ladies in grateful acknowledgement of their services, quote-unquote. Their armor is the best that money can buy, embellished with gems and gold plate, which is the ideal way for a soldier of fortune to look good and carry his wealth close to him. So again, a very simple unit here, just a very heavy armored pike unit again. So rolling out the AP, the anti-large, the charge defense, kind of phalanx style. I'm hoping that each one of these has a little bit more of a special pizzazz. Maybe Rico's, because they're so used to fighting other humans, it seems like from this lore, maybe they're more anti-infantry and less AP. I'm just hoping that there's some sort of variety between them all, or otherwise we're going to have 4 units that are the same, 3 of them having heavy armor, 1 of them having light armor. That's really going to be it. They don't have like skirmish between them or anything like that, so I definitely think they have to add some flavor, some variety to each one of these. But I do like how, and you guys get a sense for this, how this works. Each one of these units, they look the way that their lore describes them. They have a piece of their lore attached to their unit. Like these guys have the blood-stained bandages around their body parts, their armor, and you've got the cloaks around Vesperio's Vendetta. And I just love the way that they kind of add a lot of character to these units, and we're going to see these hopefully in Total War Warhammer 2 as being a really cool break of character for an army. So if you have a whole line of undead, and then you've got the what's these guys called, the Rico's Republican Guard, then it's going to add that kind of cool flair. And I really like the way that they were presented in 5th edition, and they did kind of taper off. Not many people use them at the later editions because there were so many good options for your army in your current rule book, but I think it's going to be great to see them brought back in full force here. But again, just a standard pikeman unit here. And we'll jump on over to the last unit, the Birdmen of Catrazza. Catrazza, maybe, probably. Yeah, just not 100% sure on the pronunciation on that one. Catrazza. There are times in the Italian words where the double Z isn't like a T sound, like Mario Puzo. His name is Puzzo, it's not Puzzo. But the Birdmen of Catrazza. Dedalo was a well-known craftsman and windmill builder in the city of Varezzo. He became obsessed with trying to fly like a bird after he acquired some lost manuscripts of Leonardo da Maragliano. Inspired by the ideas these contained, he began experimenting with flying devices. Only later did it emerge that these manuscripts were clever forgeries. However, by then it was far too late. Dedalo's obsession had quite taken over his life. ousting any vestige of common sense from his fevered brain. Dadalo's early attempts to fly met with no success. His efforts caused much amusement among the citizens who gathered in the piazza to watch him jumping off various towers. Fortunately for him, Dadalo's version of Leonardo's parachute was one thing that did work. Dadalo fell foul of the powerful Bata family of Verezzo, when he plunged through the roof of their country villa and landed in the marble bath of the mistress of the house while she was bathing in it. Quite apart from this impolite intrusion, Dadalo landed on top of the captain of her bodyguard, who, for some reason or other, was also in the same bath, killing him outright. Dadalo was immediately imprisoned in the leaning tower of Verezzo to avoid further embarrassment to the Republic. Determined to escape, Dadalo whiled away the days by ingeniously constructing a pair of wings using bedsheets stretched over a framework of wooden spindles cut from the furniture. Soon, he was ready to jump from his prison window, which had no bars since it was so high up that it was thought no one could escape. Dadalo's exit was rather spectacular. Miraculously, he swooped over the rooftops to freedom instead of plummeting to his death in the piazza. Flying into exile, Dadalo spent the whole of the following year training a mercenary band of his birdmen, quote-unquote. Only the best and thinnest marksmen were chosen. This was so that the birdmen could shoot at the enemy flyers even whilst they were flying high in the air. The birdmen went into action for the first time at the Battle of Montezorella and snatched victory by descending on the enemy general and carrying him off into captivity. Dadalo's birdmen were immediately hired by Alfio Romeo of Remus. Alfeo was determined to rescue the beautiful Isabella Delecta, if you don't know what that last name means, from the bent tower of Catrazza, where she had been shut up by her family until she agreed to an arranged marriage to Grobo, a rich, ugly, and cruel merchant from Maragliano. Dadalo's birdmen succeeded in this dangerous task, despite a number of marksmen guarding the tower. Henceforth, the regiment took the name Birdmen of Catrazza and is much in demand. The captain, obviously, Dadalo. Motto, those magnificent men and their flying machines. The battle cry, tally-ho! The appearance, all the birdmen are equipped with wings made of canvas stretched over a light wooden frame. This is strapped to their shoulders by means of a harness that leaves both hands free to shoot the crossbow. In flight, the wings can be flapped by means of stirrups attached to the feet. The birdmen not only glide through the air, but can flap their wings to regain height and vary their airspeed. The birdmen also wear grotesque masks with long bird-like beaks instead of noses, much like those worn of Tilea carnivals. For Tilea carnivals. So, we see a pretty cool unit here, right? We see a flying unit, skirmishing. It's got probably has that mechanic into them. Maybe an anti-large mechanic with their crossbows, maybe an AP as well, because these guys again do have crossbows. And the way their birdmaster described it leads me to believe a fear-causing unit too. So a way for, say, Empire, which doesn't have a lot of psychology affecting units, to cause a little fear and have a bit of a flying air force as well to maybe accompany the mighty Toadbringer. But they're really cool units here, and I like how they use Michelangelo's flying parachute and whatnot to kind of like perfect the original form of flight that he had envisioned in a lot of his works. But that's the coolest thing about the Dogs of War here, is you get a lot of that, again, that Italian influence, but you get a lot of like little tidbits of history here, and you can see these units, you go, oh yeah, I can see the direct historical influence of these very human units, versus like dwarves, you kind of see the cultural influences from Norse and Germanic mythology, and you see with the High Elves, you see their influences as well as the vampire counts and whatnot. But this is a pretty direct translation, just like the Empire has a pretty direct translation of the Holy Roman Empire. So these guys are going to be really awesome here, I think, again. So flying skirmisher type unit, maybe an anti-large, maybe a fear mechanic, definitely an AP from their crossbow. But as you can tell too, everything with them is got crossbows in it. But that rounds off the Tilean units for the Dogs of War. Hopefully you guys got a good idea here of all the units that will hopefully be in the game on the Dogs of War roster for Tilea, and Tilea's units as a whole. There are some other characters here that we haven't touched on. Right now we'll be doing that in a second video here. So you do have people like, let's see here, Bjorg Bearstruck and the Bearman of Urslo. You've got a lot of fun coming out of this book too, because there's, like I said, there's some high elves in here with what's his name? Asarnil the Dragonlord. We'll go into him as well. Al-Mukhtar's Desert Dogs, which are knights from Araby. And you've also got some dwarves and ogres in Long Drong Slayers, pirates, as well as what is his name? Golgfag's mercenary ogres. But those will be in another video that we'll be doing here. I might jump into the special characters, which you've also heard from a lot of the lore so far. So if you guys do want basically like a Tilea legendary lord list, let me know and I'll make that video for y'all. But if there's any funky pronunciations from some of my Italian viewers, let me know. I know I do have a couple of you from Italy watching, so please feel free to correct me. I do love a good correction from my fellow brethren. But hopefully you got a good idea of what's going on here, guys. If you do have any requests for some more lore, do let me know. I've got quite a few volumes to pour through that I can tell you all about. But hopefully you got again a good idea of some of the goodies to come. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a good one and take care.